I will tear your soul apart and broadcast your screams for every other disrespectful wretch who dares to question me.
Understood.
Lovely. Ah, good talk, my good man.
And you're locked into another episode of the Analytica Podcast. My name is Josh, and we are glad to be back with you this week for a different kind of episode, a little bit. The topic that we'll be talking, or the show, more importantly, we'll be talking about today is something that we normally wouldn't advise to watch, but we do think it is very important with the state of things, how they are in entertainment in that retrospect. But before we get any further, I'm going to bring in my lovely wife, Rebecca.
Hey, guys.
Once
again, you made me muted.
I'm sorry.
Hey, guys.
So, Rebecca, it was really on your heart for this episode that we prayed before. And I think that's so important because we do want to make sure that we edify God and that He leads this conversation. And why do you think that's so important?
Yeah, I mean, it's important for every episode. We just don't typically do it. But this one was really important, I think, because we're dealing with very secular, very adult subject matter. And it just felt really important to keep God at the forefront of this conversation and just make sure that our words are being used by God in this particular conversation, because it can be a bit of a sticky conversation, I think, to have. So yeah, I think I'm glad that we did it.
Yeah, absolutely. And in case you guys didn't hear the disclaimer at the beginning of the episode, the show that we'll be talking about is very adult. I know that it's on Amazon Prime and it's rated 16 plus, but I would argue it needs to be
18 plus
18, honestly.
Minimum, yeah, for sure.
But before we get into that, I know I'm kind of belaboring the moment, but we actually have a guest on the show that we wanted to have some type of, credentials, somewhat of an expert to talk about this show, theologically speaking. So he has a podcast called A Side of Mayo. Please welcome Stephen to the podcast.
Hello.
Hey, Stephen. It's so glad to have you on, and thank you so much for joining us.
No problem.
And before we get too much into our discussion, we want to have our audience get to know you a little bit. So, Rebecca, if you'll go ahead and go through with our interview questions.
Yeah. So, I mean, first things first, just tell us a little bit about yourself. I know it's a big question, but yeah, give us a bit of an overview.
Well, like you said, I've got my own podcast called A Side of Mayo, and that kind of encompasses basically everything. It's history, religion, mythology, and general geekery. And those four things kind of explain most of my personality. I am a consummate dork, and I am always studying and learning something. And I like the goofier things. So, I found this shirt a few years ago, and it's, supposed to have the Star Wars look, but...
Nice.
I recognized it, so I think it works. Yeah, so you said that you're always learning, always looking at new things. And with that, you actually have a degree in divinity, right?
Yeah, I have a bachelor's degree in divinity. And then lots of other random study in other directions.
So how does divinity, how is it different than going to seminary? Is it different?
Yes and no. So seminary, Bible college, university, on the one hand, they're all the same with kind of different focuses, and some are a little more comprehensive than others. As far as the degrees go, you can get the same types of degrees at all of them. So for generally being a pastor, the most common degrees are either divinity or theology, and you can get both those at seminary, you can get both those at Bible college, you can get both those at a university. The big difference is, I would say, theology is more on the philosophical side, divinity is more on the practical side. So you get a lot of the same core teaching, or the same core classes, but divinity focuses a lot more on giving somebody the broad knowledge required for working in and running a church, whereas theology is going to go a little bit more deep into topics, but it's a lot of the same classes, so it kind of really just depends on which focus you get while you're studying. Because you're going to do theology, you're going to do hermeneutics, you're going to do biblical history, you may or may not touch on the languages, and then there's the more practical end, you get into like counseling, leadership studies, general, just like what you're doing at the church when you're not being, the guy up front type thing.
Okay. Okay.
I think I answered it.
Okay. Yeah, that's interesting. I didn't know that there was there's that big of a difference in the two. But
Well,
that
and
makes sense.
there's several others because every degree's got a focus.
Sure.
So, like in particular, one of the colleges I do my classes through. So there's the Bachelor's in Divinity program, but then you can have a focus on like Christian business, youth ministry, music, women's ministry. So they give you the basics and then they let you branch out. So it's not just, this is the degree for a pastor. These are the degrees for people working in ministry somewhere. When you sent me these questions earlier, I decided to finally go look up where I stand. And there's a job website that tracks the education levels for people that typically work in certain positions. So in the United States, and let me pull up a little thing here. So for pastors, 51% have a bachelor's degree, 31% have a master's, 4% have a doctorate. Everybody else has an associate's or certificate training or something like that. So associate's degree says it's at 8%, and then other is 6%. So your average pastor has a bachelor's degree, but this takes into account everything from the simple non-denominational churches where you basically just have to feel like you have a call to preach and you don't need any official training, to churches like the Catholic Church that often requires a master's or a doctorate. So it's a broad analysis. Different churches are going to have different requirements.
Interesting. Yeah, I didn't know that the Catholic Church required that much schooling.
For the higher up positions, yeah. Most of the people that are at bishop and higher, you're looking at least a master's.
Yeah.
And sometimes when you say seminary, that means master's degree. Sometimes it doesn't, because there's a whole bunch of different ones. There's some colleges that are called a seminary and it's just certificate training. There's some that are called a seminary and it's just 2 or 4 year college. So it really is something you have to look at the specific institution when you're trying to find the classes to take, because there's a lot of them out there, and if you just go off of the name you've heard for that type of class, you might be going in the wrong direction.
Yeah, I know there's like colleges or like an accredited university are going to be more structured, I guess, really. They're like recognized.
Well, so this is something that is almost uniquely religious studies. There are a lot of colleges and institutions, seminaries, whatever, that are not nationally accredited, but they are accredited through partnerships with other organizations. I did my first bachelor's at Christian Leaders Institute, which is not nationally accredited, but the credits from there transferred over to Regent University, which is nationally accredited, and it's one of the highest ranked Christian colleges in the nation. So you can find good classes that are not nationally accredited, but you're also going to find junk that's not worth taking. The difference is you can usually find them a lot cheaper if you're not going for government accreditation, because you're not dealing with the student cost that's bloated from student loans. And if you're just planning on working within a church, they're looking more at, have you had the training? Have you had the experience versus does the government say you know this job?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, what's really is more important, I guess, for being able to teach or participate in religious activities. It matters more what the religion says, right? Than the government.
Well, it's that whole conversation. It's like, well, this is what man says. This is what God says. So, we're more focused on, hey, are you able to lead a congregation in truth rather
Right.
than do you think that they're then set by, the tax laws to become a church and be a leader. All right. Well, as we said, we're going to be discussing a show that does not have the character of God, nonetheless, Jesus, in the series.
At least in season 1.
Yeah, at least in season 1.
And there's going to be two more.
The trailer for season 2 came out.
Oh, really?
Oh, it did?
Yeah.
Wow.
I watched it a couple of days ago.
Okay, we need to watch that, man.
Yeah, we missed that. Huh.
And yeah, I mean, it doesn't show really anything new. It's mostly clips from season 1 with voiceover from stuff. But yeah, it's definitely interesting, and I'm looking forward to seeing what happens.
Yes.
For a show that I never planned on watching, I want to know what happens now.
Yeah, same. You just you're so invested in the story, like, hey, didn't plan on it, but like, let's see where this goes. Let's see what ends up happening in the end. We may have kind of like divulged a little bit of information. So those of you listening or watching may know what we're already going to talk about. This actually started way back in 2019 as a pilot animation episode on YouTube.
Which you can still find.
Yeah, you can still find. So Rebecca, go ahead and discuss. Well, actually, Stephen, what will we be talking about today?
It is Hazbin Hotel. So when I watched the show, I just kind of started making bullet points of theological things that came up that we could discuss, and there's a lot of them. But what I will say, as far as like the show in general, most of it is not based on the Bible.
Right.
It's mostly based on Christian and other writings from the past 2,000 years, especially a lot of them in the medieval period.
Mm-hmm.
The most biblical thing you got is basically the story of Adam and Eve.
Okay.
And then everything beyond that is kind of the creators drawing from a whole bunch of other sources. So, I mean, and I've got notes on all of them to kind of try and discuss wherever we want to go.
Yeah, we have so many notes here that this will be a 2-part episode. It's just hard to contain all this in the time that we have per episode each week. All right, well, let's get into it. Rebecca, go ahead and tell us, or tell our viewers, for those who may have not seen this, what Hazbin Hotel is about.
Yeah, so Hazbin Hotel, very basic sense. It follows Charlie, who is the princess of hell. Her father is Lucifer, and her mother is named Lilith, which I'm sure we'll get to talking about who she is and where she came from. And so it follows Charlie as she pursues her seemingly impossible goal of rehabilitating demons to peacefully reduce the overpopulation of hell. So after every year, there's an extermination of the residents of hell, and she thinks that by redeeming them, that we can reduce that and not have to commit genocide, essentially. So that's it. It's all about redemption and forgiveness and what is goodness, essentially.
And honestly, there is so much to unpack, even in the synopsis alone.
Yeah,
so much.
It's a very biblical theme. It's just wrapped up in a whole bunch of other stuff.
A whole bunch of other stuff. Yes.
And yeah, we'll get into that. So for those of you who may have seen or heard about Hazbin Hotel, you know that, as we've said, it's not a theologically or biblically based show, apart from the story of Adam and Eve, and of course Lucifer. But in the character of Lucifer is not made to be this evil person or this demon of darkness. They actually paint him as like somebody that we're supposed to feel sorry for. And I felt very conflicted because I'm like, okay, I kind of do feel sorry for him because this is a fictional Lucifer, not the real Lucifer. And how do I that? Yeah, it was just, yeah.
Yeah, it got very jumbled. And the reason that we want to talk about Hazbin Hotel too, even though it is a very adult subject, not something we would typically watch. My face during the whole first episode was like, what are we watching? It was a lot. But the reason we want to talk about it is because I think there's particularly the way that heaven is portrayed, is how so many people who are not Christians, the secular world views Christians. And I think that's worth talking about of, well, how do they view us? What is that actually like? And what is their view of salvation? So I find that conversation really, really interesting. But to start off, I mean, so we have God's not in the picture. I think Josh, you mentioned that earlier. God's not in the picture here. Essentially, the angels. What I've gathered is that the angels have created Earth and mankind, and they in their own ways. And heaven is corrupt, essentially, as we find out. Also, there's going to be like a lot of spoilers, by the way. So if you're wanting to watch, I don't know how we can have this conversation without having spoilers.
Honestly, you can't.
No, we're going to give away a lot.
A lot. Yeah. So if you want to watch it, then
and this is going a few like levels deeper because I've only seen like one Christian YouTuber give actually a high level overview of the show.
I saw one video, and the person, they kind of claim to be a Christian, I think, but I'm not sure. But they were looking more at the animation and the story and stuff anyway. So, I did want to say, as far as God not appearing in the show, for one thing, that's pretty common in modern media anyway.
Yeah,
you don't include God, you don't include Jesus, you just put the angels in there and make them jerks. But it's also a very deist view. So within the show, they do mention like there's something above us. We are beholding, but they don't go any further than that. Because there's the whole, we don't know why anybody makes it to heaven. We just know when they get there. So like it skirts the idea of God without directly including God or Jesus in the show. And there's some of the other because I went on a YouTube binge looking to see stuff on here too, and some of the world building talked about the darkness, which is not necessarily Lucifer, but it's just the concept of evil. And Lucifer's actions led it into the world, not that he initially was bad.
Right.
Which is also, that's pretty common in modern media too. Lucifer has been repainted as like a jilted savior. Like he wanted to help humanity and he got punished for it. And that's all over.
I mean, if I was Satan, that's the route that I would go to try to deceive people.
I'll get to this more in a little bit, but Lucifer is not Satan in the show. They're two different characters. Lucifer and Satan are both in the world, but they're not the same person. So there's also the show Hell of a Boss, which is it takes place in the same world. So I watched that too, which very similar stuff because it's the same world. They showed a lot more of the world building. But I'll get into that in a little bit. But yeah, Lucifer and Satan are not the same person in this show. They both exist though.
That's interesting. I didn't know that yet. We haven't watched that one. That was a lot leading up to this. So yeah, we'll lean on your knowledge for some of that. Yeah. So, okay. So getting a little bit further in some of our notes, so I mentioned earlier that heaven is committing genocide. And I thought that was really interesting as far as the whole like theology perspective is that in one of the songs they say, if hell is forever, then heaven must be a lie.
Yeah. When Charlie and Emily or the angel and the demon get together and go, no. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I
I
thought that was
love the songs in this show. I'm just like,
Yes.
I was in band and choir, and I'm just a dork anyway. My mind thinks in lyrics. It's kind of an ADHD thing. And I love the music. It's been stuck in my head for a month.
Yeah, I've had
Same.
like some of the songs on repeat. Like Becca was a band kid, theater kid. I was a little bit into theater. I love musicals.
Speech
So
trauma.
yes.
Yeah, it was there's two songs per episode.
Yes.
Yeah. And a lot of the voice actors are from like Broadway and stuff.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, one of my favorites is what's his name? Jeremy something. He was in the Newsies, and he was in the Tangled show.
Yeah,
He was Varian. Yeah. He's great. Love him. He was Lucifer though.
Oh, he was in the Tangled series, not the movie. I was like, who?
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
the Tangled series.
I have not watched the series, but my daughter has a playlist with some Disney songs on it, and Varian sings one of them, so I recognize the voice. Yeah.
Yep.
Yes.
Yeah, that's him. It's a good show. The Tangled series. We really enjoyed it. We should at some point do that on the show here.
Well, they're the lighter subject.
Yes, much lighter subject. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so every year a whole bunch of angels come down to hell and just start killing. Which, initially that was an interesting bit there, because there's that question of, well, they're already dead, right? So this is one of the things I dug more into the world building. So, because you also see other characters just killing people in hell anyway. So apparently the way it works in the show, at least at the beginning, because by the end of the show things seem to be going different directions. If you get killed just by any random person doing whatever, you reform in hell. So I don't know how long it takes or anything like that, but like in the pilot episode, when Serpentius and Cherry Bomb and Angel Dust are fighting each other, and like people on the sidelines are getting blown up because they're just collateral damage, those people reform later somewhere in hell. I don't know if it's like they show up at their house or something. I think somebody mentioned it at one point, but I don't remember the exact bit. The difference is if you get killed by an angelic weapon, then you're dead. At least as far as the initial show goes. But that brings up the question still is, you're already dead, for man there's once to live and then the judgment type thing.
Right.
It's a view on more of the fringe Christian groups, and I think it's also the view that Jehovah's Witnesses have, which I'm not going to get into that debate. But annihilationism, which is the idea that the souls in hell will eventually be permanently destroyed. So that view has existed for centuries. I think it does trace back to the early days of the church, maybe even a little bit earlier, but I'm not positive. So it's been around, but it's never been the main view.
Yeah, and I've heard about people saying, "Oh, well, hell's not forever. It's only for a certain amount of time, and then God just destroys it. And there's no more hell." Like the view I've always had is like, if heaven is eternal, it says in the word eternal torment, suffering, and eternal doesn't mean just a little bit, just a year or a millennium. It does not end. At least that's a view that I hold and that I've read in scripture.
Yeah, and that's kind of the usual view. And there are some others, like I said, most of them are fringe. One of my professors talked about one that he said that several of the Orthodox fathers had in the early church, and it's kind of the idea that hell is purgatory, which actually comes up later in the show. But it's that everybody will eventually be purified, because there's the verses about every knee will bow type thing. I'm not quite sold on that idea. I haven't dug into it too much, but it is a view that's out there, that eventually everybody will come around. And that's kind of the image of fire as purification rather than destruction.
So more of it goes more into like universalism.
Yeah,
We'll all
you
be
could go
redeemed
there.
eventually.
It's, and we're not talking about like the demons and the devil and stuff. We're talking just humans. Like it's the belief that eventually everybody will be saved, but if you're going to have to go through a certain amount of purification first, depending on where you are at.
Interesting.
And that, yeah, it's not a main view. I would say most churches would definitely view it as, if not entirely heretical, at least partially heretical. But it is one that has popped up throughout the years within the church. So, it's always good to be aware of what's out there. But yeah, generally the main view is, you die, you go to heaven or you go to hell. That's it. The spirit is eternal, and your spirit stays in whatever final place it is going to be in. There are a few parts where that does change, though. So, like in Revelation, where it says that the realm of the dead gets tossed into the lake of fire, or the teaching about Jesus going into the realm of the dead and emptying the realm of the saints and taking them with him. So one of my bullet points that I had was, the nature of heaven and hell. So do you want me to keep going on that, or?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay.
Absolutely.
So in the early days of Judaism, they didn't really have a concrete concept of hell or heaven. And you've probably heard of the term Sheol. So the idea behind it is just the place of the dead. It's not heaven, it's not hell, it's the place of the dead. But it has two compartments. So it's the place where the good dead go, it's the place where the bad dead go. In a lot of the early Old Testament writing, there's not a lot of distinction. They didn't really talk much about going to heaven or hell or anything like that. There was just kind of, well, when David says, my son's dead, he won't come to me, but I can go to him. You get stuff like that, but you don't get a lot of description of what the afterlife is going to be like. But then you get to, like, when Jesus tells the parable about Lazarus, that is very much kind of the view of Sheol. You've got Lazarus in the section for the good dead, and you've got the rich man in the section for the bad dead. And there's a gulf in between them, but apparently at least the bad side can see across. He never really says whether the good side can. But then after the crucifixion, the general idea is that Jesus emptied the good side and took them with him. Now, it may be an ongoing process, kind of depends on your whole view of sainthood. If you're Catholic or Orthodox or some of the high church Protestants. But so you had kind of like the basic realm of the dead, and then you have the eventual final realm of the dead. So you have the new heavens and the new earth when everything's recreated and heaven and earth are one. And then you have the lake of fire, which is where anybody that was in the bad section of the realm of the dead, it gets tossed into there.
It's something that I've never quite understood, and maybe that's like, it's just beyond me and it doesn't even really matter. But like, what happens to the people before Christ? And because they didn't have the option to choose, are they going to be judged based on their deeds alone? Or is it going to be different? I don't know.
So there's a lot of different views around this type of stuff. The simplest view is that they lived their life. They followed God to the best of their ability, so they kind of ended up in the realm of the good dead, in Sheol, whatever. And then after the crucifixion, the assumption is that they accepted Christ and went with him. I don't know if there's an idea that any of them could have denied him after that point. That'd be a weird thing. It's similar to the idea of the doctrine of unreached peoples. that you hear come up a lot when you're like, well, what if you lived in a country that never heard about Jesus? God, the idea behind it is that God judges you based on what you did with what you reasonably knew.
Mm.
If you had never heard of Jesus, you still know something of God. Creation speaks of God so that no man can deny it type thing from Paul.
Yeah.
Like everybody has some type of knowledge. What did you do with that knowledge? And there's debates on how accurate that is because it's one of those things we're never going to know until we get there. There's a lot of the questions about the exact nature of heaven and hell and the eternal state of the soul. We're not going to know on this side of heaven. But
We can make our best guesses,
yeah,
but
well,
yeah.
and all of those type of questions come back to God is just.
Yeah.
Whatever the situation is, he will do justice. But then God also gives grace. So he will do justice, he will give grace, and it's his decision.
Yeah.
It will be the right decision, it will be just, and it will be full of grace, but we don't get to make it, and we don't know what it's going to be.
Exactly. And that's okay. What the most important thing is that you worry about yourself, right? And your personal salvation when it comes down to it.
Well,
Yeah.
and do what you can for others. There is something to be said about, parents helping with the salvation of their children type thing.
Yeah.
You read the stories of the whole household was saved, or like the story of the flood. Noah was the righteous one. His righteousness saved his family. Or Lot was the righteous one. His righteousness saved his family. So I call it secondary salvation. It's the idea that your righteousness can, in part, help save somebody else, whether or not they have the choice at the time. Because Lot's daughters didn't really get much of a decision. They had to go with their dad. In the story of the ark, his sons don't really give a decision. They had to go with their dad. You get the stories in the book of Acts when Peter goes to the Greek man's house and it says the whole household was saved. So there's something to be said for being the righteous one standing at the front of the family type thing.
Yeah. So getting back to the show here a little bit. Did you notice how much iconography is in the show, The Christian?
The visuals are great. If you just start with like Lucifer's hat, it's got an apple and a snake.
Yes, there are
So many
so many
apples in
apples
the show.
everywhere. Yes.
Well, there's apples
Which is-
everywhere. There's eyeballs everywhere too, which is a weird thing. Like on all the buildings in hell, there's random eyeballs, and there's a lot of theories about what those are.
Mm.
Interesting. It reminds me of the oh gosh, the Illuminati eye, right? Or is that
Yeah.
a sign of the Freemasons as well, right?
Well, so a lot of the imagery for any group that somebody thinks is, the overarching cult running humanity kind of gets lumped together. If you talk to any conspiracy theorist for long enough, they just kind of seem to draw from the same pool of imagery, even if they're not talking about the same group. So it's all there. It's in the general zeitgeist of our mentality. We know it's there, which makes it great visuals because people look at it and go, okay, yeah, I get it. That's the point. When you're dealing with a visual means of storytelling, you're, the songs are amazing. The, 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 the dialogue, wow, my brain wasn't working. The dialogue's great, but then you also have, I can throw all this stuff in the background and see if people notice. And I know there's a ton of videos on those. Like, did you see this in this episode? Or what about this thing here? Yeah, we could do an entire episode just talking about the different visuals.
Yeah, one of the things that Josh and I pointed out while we were watching is in the very first episode where Adam is talking with Charlie and he's eating those ribs.
Yeah.
And he offers her one. I thought that was really funny. Because God took the rib from
Yep.
Adam and gave it to Eve to create Eve in the biblical story. I thought that was really funny.
The one part of imagery I think is interesting. Out of all of the angels, Adam and the executioners they look demonic.
Yes.
They do.
So the
But
whole
it's
mask
intentional
thing, yeah.
because they wear the mask.
Yes,
Right.
So
that's right.
it's not just they look demonic because they have made themselves demonic. And they're the villains. I mean, there's other villains in the show, but they are the villains. And they have made themselves look demonic.
Yeah, it's kind of an oxymoron when you think about it, because you think angels good, holy, but then they get the mask with the the scary face, the horns, and yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's the point. I think that's the point the creator was trying to make across, is that, you know, there are those, particularly there are those Christians, and Adam is like the epitome of this, who
Yeah.
are
I will say Adam is the exception, because nobody acts to the level that he does.
he's extreme.
Yeah, in heaven.
Yeah. Which we'll get way more into Adam.
Yeah.
He's the
Yeah.
worst.
And I appreciate the fact they did that, actually. Because, there's a lot of stories where we're going to make the villain redeemable. Now, we don't know what's going to happen in season 2. But as far as season 1 goes, Adam is not redeemable at all. Like, you deserve everything that's coming at you because of everything you've done throughout the whole show.
Exactly.
Nobody cares when the end of the show hits. They're like, yep, that was it. You don't have anybody, oh, we could have saved him. Like, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's I find it interesting too, from a theological perspective, that Adam, who is a human, when he died, became an angel. And there's a lot of people who believe that.
One of the bullet points I've put in there. So people don't become angels when they die. We're not going to sit there on a cloud with wings and a harp and that doesn't happen. The Bible says we will become like the angels. But angel is a very misused word. Angel just means messenger. So there are a lot of spiritual beings that are mentioned throughout the Bible. They aren't all angels, but in our modern language, we have grouped them all as angels.
Now, that is a really interesting point that I have never actually thought about, but it makes so much sense that there are multiple spiritual beings, but they're messengers of God, but they're different beings. That's really interesting. That makes sense, though, is why the descriptions are so different. You see in Ezekiel, he's got the wheels upon wheels and all the eyes, but then you've got other descriptions.
The Ophanim, which you see them when they go up to heaven.
Yeah.
They did a good job
really
of trying to portray the different beings up there. So you got the seraphim, the Ophanim. You've got the cherubs aren't accurate, but they did that to go with the general idea of the little baby angel thing, which whatever, it's their show. But yeah, I mean, because the Bible does not go into spiritual beings very much. When you get a description of one, it's just a quick, this is who's there, and then we move on to what's happening. You've got all of these angels or spiritual beings or whatever you want to call them. They're sitting around the throne of God. Okay, let's look at God. Or you've got Daniel when he starts to pray, and eventually the angel comes to him and he's like, yeah, I tried to show up earlier, but the Prince of Persia, which is a different spiritual being, stopped me. Which brings up the whole, we have no idea what's going on in the spiritual realms. We've heard of the warfare of Michael and the fallen angels and all that stuff, but in our day-to-day lives, am I praying and some angel is being prevented from getting to me to help with that prayer? I don't know. It's almost always just a throwaway, quick little thing of, okay, there's a spiritual being, let's move on. The probably the most we get is when Paul kind of gives a list, and it's an incomplete list. And most lists that I've seen include it as angels, principalities, powers, dominions, whatever. But he never says it's a list of angels. He could also be talking about a list of evil spiritual beings.
Yeah, so you're talking about Ephesians, right? Ephesians 6:12, is that right? Where he lists but our fight is not against
I'll say this. I am great at remembering the words. I'm horrible at remembering which chapter and verse. So I can quote biblical concepts all day. I can't always tell you which book it came from. So if you look at my search history, it's a lot of me typing in the word I remember to try and figure out which verse it was.
I get that. Yeah.
But the verse notations weren't there originally anyway.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. So the concept you're talking about though is the verse where it's talking about, but our fight is not against man, it's against the principalities and the powers of
Powers and
darkness.
dominions, which like it sounds like he's talking about, these are the bad guys. But then on my notes, I've got the list of um, St. Thomas Aquinas, hierarchy of angels. Powers, principalities are listed as 6 and 7. Dominions are listed as 4. Like, but nobody really knows. We've got ideas, but it's not one of those things. It's not important.
Yeah, it's not. It's not a salvation issue. Sure, we can talk about these things. It's interesting. But like you said, it's in the Bible when angels are mentioned, it's like they're described, they're there, but then the focus is all on God. And that's how our lives should be, because we can so easily get into angel and demon worship. And that is not of God. That's not what he has for us. We are to worship him and him alone.
And when they are described, they're almost always described by a title. You rarely get a name.
Yes.
You've got Michael and Gabriel, and then if you go into the Deuterocanon, you've got Raphael, and I think Uriel's in there too. But beyond those, you basically don't get a lot of, this is the demon or this is the angel that I dealt with. It was an angel, it was a demon. If they get any type of description, you get it was the destroyer. Or, it was like Satan just means accuser. It's not a name, it's a title. Devil is the Greek version. It also means accuser. It's just a title.
Didn't know that. That's interesting. Yeah. And then Jesus calls him the father of lies.
Yeah.
Again, title. Yeah. Hmm.
But then also that comes back to the way names worked in Hebrew.
Mm.
Because, unlike English where my name is Stephen and hey, cool, it's Stephen. In Hebrew, your name is a phrase or a saying or something. It's a description. So you can look at a name and it might look like a title. So that brings in confusion itself. Because all of the biblical names that end with L, so it's something God. It's like hand of God, strength of God, avenger of God, whatever. Like any name that ends with L, you're saying something about God with that person's name.
Interesting. I didn't know that. That's really
Yeah,
cool.
neither did I.
I knew that, obviously I know that names have meanings and everything. I think the English equivalent would probably be the name like Faith or Hope, or,
Yeah.
those are pretty common.
Actually, so we used to have those names. They kind of petered out last century, like 2 centuries ago now. Darn millennium. But so when I was doing my first history classes in college, my professor brought up his favorite name on a gravestone was for a guy. And so names like this, you would generally give the kid a name that represented what you wanted them to be or something you wanted them to have. So like faith, chastity, hope, This guy's name was takes care of his parents in their old age.
Literally.
That was his literal name.
Oh my gosh.
Wow.
But that has died out in our society. The closest most of us in America are going to get to that is if you live somewhere where you interact with the indigenous people. Like I'm close to the reservation. I have a lot of friends and family who are native or have native ties. And that's where you get the names like running bear. Like it's a phrase that means something about the person usually. But we don't have those type of names in English.
Yeah, which is, I think, kind of sad, It's because it's almost like it's a prayer for your child of what do you want them to be like? And it's kind of sad that it's seen as like weird in our society when people do that. I've got someone that I know who's named their children oh my gosh, like Majesty and Shekinah and other,
People are going to look at that and go, "What?" I wanted to dig into a lot of the names in the show, and I didn't dig into them as much as I want. But so, like, there's the character Zestiel. It's an L name. I I didn't get a good description of what it means because that's one they made up for the show. It's not like a name taken from a known entity in history. But then I was really curious why they named their daughter Charlie. So I did some digging around on that. There is a dessert called an apple charlotte.
Huh. Interesting. Yeah, so
So
that would go
that
along with the whole Apple theme that
yeah.
they throw in,
So
which I find
that
interesting that
might
there's
not be their reasoning, but I think it is.
uh, sounds good to me, right? Yeah. I find it interesting though that the fruit that's talked about in Genesis has, for whatever reason, in modern history become synonymous with apple when
Yeah.
really it's probably more of like a permission or something like that that would have been around the Middle East in that area.
Well, and honestly, so the depending on your view of the fruit, because there's the literal, the symbolic, whatever, it would have probably been something unique. It's not like God made a whole bunch of these trees and like I made a grove of apple trees. Don't eat any of the apples. He made one tree. It's not like I made one apple tree that teaches you good and evil, but all those apple trees, go ahead and eat them. That it would most likely just be a unique.
Oh, that's an interesting concept there. I like that. Um, so since the show talks so much um about redemption and salvation, um I think it's worth talking about, particularly with the song It Starts With Sorry.
Yeah, there's a lot of theology in the song.
Oh man, it's one of my favorites. Serpentius, one of my favorite character. Thought that song was one of my favorites.
I'm an Alistair guy.
Yeah.
Alistair's my favorite. But so if you take the general plot of Hazbin Hotel and set it anywhere except for heaven and hell, it is a very biblical plot. Everybody's
Right.
broken.
Yes.
Everybody's life is crash, but we're in it together. Can we help each other? Can we get better? Can we be redeemed?
Yep.
If you remove the fact they're in hell, all of a sudden it becomes a show that you could basically watch on any, like you'd have to reframe some of it. You could do it as a Sunday school show, because that's the basic point. How does redemption work? Why do we need redemption? Everybody's broken. And
Yeah.
that song, it starts with sorry. That's repentance. It starts with admitting you have done wrong. And then repent is, stop, turn, go the other way. It's not, oh, I did a bad thing. Well, I'm going to do the same bad thing tomorrow, but I do feel sorry about it. Trust me. It's, I feel sorry about it and I'm going to try and not do it again. You've got Angel Dust, who is the first repentant in the beginning of the show. Although, when you watch the pilot and stuff, you find out that he's mostly just there for the free room and board. And then you've got Serpentius, who ends up being the repentant because at the time he realizes he needs it more. Because he gets sent in to be a spy. He gets sent in to shut this thing down, to break it, to do whatever he can to stop it. And they look at him and go, yeah, we know, but we'll accept you anyway.
Yeah. What a beautiful picture of love and grace and what God does for us.
Yeah. Well, and you've brought up how a lot of the angels, it's the view that most people have of the stereotypical angry Christian. And if we are supposed to be helping people redeem, helping people repent, if they say sorry, we're not going to sit there and go, yeah, but you still did it. You did a bad thing. No, they are genuinely repenting. We are supposed to walk alongside them because we are all family. And I think they do a great job of that in the show. The other one is the song between Husk and Angel. You're a loser. And, at first it's the whole joke of, yeah, you're a loser, but so am I.
Yep.
None of us are perfect. We're in this together.
Yeah.
I've been through a lot of small groups and other Bible studies that have done a great job of focusing on that. Because, none of us are perfect. And when we realize that, then we don't hold it against each other. When we realize we're all broken and flawed, then we can all help each other go towards the same goal. Which, by the end of that song, you've got Angel fighting back and telling Husk, I'm not just good at, because he's a porn star, I'm not just good there. I also have other skills. And Husk's like, good. I like this guy. Because now he's being honest instead of hiding behind the man.
When Angel becomes like more real, more than self, because Husk outright says, it's like, this, you're throwing on that, you're fake. And Angel gets really offended by that. It's like, how can you say that I'm fake? I'm doing all this. And it's, when he goes out and like drinks and, tries to forget, he's trying to forget like the reality and trying to make himself more broken so that he's not worthy of the contract that he's in, which is explained later. But yeah, like all of episode 4, there are some hard parts to watch, but it really resembles like the broken nature of man, I feel.
Well, yeah, and it's I'm not being fake. I'm at rock bottom, and I'm trying to be the person I have to be to survive here. And until somebody shows him a better way to be a survivor, he just keeps following the same pattern. Drugs, alcohol, sex, every day, every night. And then somebody shows him friendship. And then you see throughout the rest of the show, he's still tied to the sins of his past because they still have a hold on him. He's still got that contract. Like, I messed up and I have to deal with this. But it's no longer I leave that job and come back to a life that's worth nothing. I leave that job and come back to a life with friends and family. And we are all in this. We are all getting better.
Exactly. I think we're probably coming in for a landing here on our discussion on theology. Okay, so let's talk about the difference in heaven. What is heaven like biblically, and what is it like portrayed in the show? I think about the only thing that's the same is that the streets are paved with gold.
And everybody's hot.
Right is the politest of the lot, and everyone is hot.
Yeah. That's definitely different than the Bible.
Well, is it though? If everybody is in a glorified, perfected body, is it inaccurate to say that everybody's hot? If you're saying that everybody's hot, you're looking at it from a fleshly standpoint of,
Right.
they're attractive and there might be
Yeah.
some lust and adultery ideas going on there.
Yes.
But it's the idea that everybody is renewed. Your body is what it was meant to be.
Absolutely.
If you have lived your whole life with a disease, a disability, anything like that, it will not be there.
Yeah.
Your body will be perfected into the form that it's supposed to be. And then there's the debate of, well, am I going to be a kid? Am I going to be an adult? What age am I going to be?
Right.
You will be physically perfected. So if you look at our development, that means roughly you're going to be somewhere about 25 to 30 if you wanted to equate an age to it. 25 to 35-ish. Because that's kind of where we max out and then start going down.
and that's the age I've always heard, like, from people who have claimed to like go to heaven and then come back, and they saw their ancestors or their grandparents or whatnot, and they've been they weren't they weren't that age, they didn't look like that when they died. They were like 25, 30, and we don't really know, like a spiritual, physical, renewed body is going to be like this. So we just don't know what it's going to look like, really.
We know it will be a physical body because Revelation talks about the new heavens and the new earth. It's not just living in a spiritual realm. Everything is one. So, and it's Jesus talks about the resurrection. So it's not just your spirit living up in the clouds, which is an inaccurate view anyway.
Yes.
It's your spirit and your body reunited the way they were supposed to be from the beginning. So heaven, it definitely follows the popular idea. St. Peter is at the gate, which is the closest you get to flat out claiming Christianity. Because almost everything else in the show could almost also pass for Judaism and possibly even Islam. But as soon as you start throwing in saints, you're like, yep, definitely Christian. I mean, there are some differences in the views of heaven and hell between the three major Abrahamic branches, but there's enough similarity that the show could kind of touch on all three. And then you bring in St. Peter. Like, yeah, okay, we're dealing with Christianity. The way that most people think about it, it's a city up in the clouds. That's not the way the Bible describes it. To put it into one literal hyphenated word, heaven is God space. Wherever God exists at any time, that is heaven. So when you're on earth, you have places that are temples. You have the literal temple, you have the Garden of Eden, you have the tabernacle, you have Jesus. These are all heaven on earth. They are all described through temple language. It's a place where God dwells on earth, but wherever God dwells is also heaven. So you have heaven meeting earth in these places. And then when you get to Revelation, it just becomes permanent. Heaven and earth are fully one. It's new creation. Everything's there. God dwells with mankind, and there will never be a separation again. But that's a revelation. We're not there yet. We're in the stage of Jesus has died, risen, and has not come back yet. And there's a whole bunch of debates on what's happening there. I'm going to go to heaven with a mansion made of gold. When Jesus tells his disciples that he's going to prepare a place for them, the phrase he uses is a phrase for a Roman army camp. It's not a permanent dwelling. I'm going to prepare a place for you, but it's an army camp because God's kingdom uses a lot of military imagery. We are the army of God. God is a conqueror. It's not just, I'm going to go make a home. You're going to come there and live with me. What does the military do? They move. They conquer places. The second coming is everybody coming back with Christ. It's not just, we went to heaven, we're going to stay up there. It's, you're coming back now. Jesus is coming back to earth and things are moving.
We got things to do, to accomplish. Yeah. Awesome. Well, so I think that pretty much wraps up our conversation then about theology. Oh, you got two more. Go for it.
Yeah. Their theology and character and stuff. So Satan and Lucifer, I said earlier that they're not the same person in the show. So they don't go much into the layout of hell in Hazbin Hotel. But if you, in the background of one of the scenes with Lucifer, you see the layout of hell, and it's 7 rings going down. So it's kind of based on Dante, but instead of the 9 layers of hell type thing, it's 7 rings, and each ring is one of the 7 deadly sins. The first ring is pride, and that ring is ruled over by Lucifer. He's the king of hell. Every other ring has a prince, which you see some of them in Hazbin, or you see some of them in Hell of a Boss. We haven't seen any of them in Hazbin Hotel yet. But the second ring down is Wrath. And apparently the ruler of Wrath is Satan. So as far as the show goes, Lucifer and Satan are not the same character. But Lucifer's background matches Satan described in the Bible much more than anything else. Because Jesus says that Satan was the serpent in the garden. Lucifer is a name that we get from Isaiah that was applied to a Babylonian king, and then people saw a similarity with the story of the fall, so then they've also applied it to Satan. It may or may not be the same figure, but for most people it is. So Lucifer, Satan, the devil, for most people they're the same. For some people they're not. There's a bunch of debate there, but I find it funny that she included Lucifer and Satan as 2 characters in the show. But then Lucifer's storyline matches the biblical Satan storyline better.
That is very interesting. Okay, so they're in Pride is where the whole Hazbin Hotel is located, is in Pride. Is that right?
Yeah, so there's the 7 rings of hell. Pride is the ring where sinners go. So anybody that dies and goes to hell lives in the Pride ring. Every layer below that is populated by demons that were born and raised and live in hell. There's imps, there's hellhounds, there's a bunch of other things. But sinners apparently are not allowed to go down to the lower levels. They are stuck on the top level because the sinners are more powerful than any of the demons. So they would kind of upend things. I mean, there's a lot of interesting world building.
Yeah, I would not have. That's so different than from what the Bible says.
Yeah.
That it's
Well, and
it's like, oh,
the other big difference there is Lilith. So she's popular nowadays, but she was not originally a character in the Bible. The story in the show is Lilith and Adam were the first man and wife. And Lilith refused to submit to Adam, and then God made Eve. Lilith ended up with Lucifer, and on down the line. Part of that comes from, in Genesis 1, it just says God created man and woman. Male and female, he created them. That's it. Doesn't give any other description. And then you get to Genesis 2, and you've got the story of God creating Adam, and then the story of God creating Eve. So people have looked at that and said, well, these are two different stories. Which technically they're not, but that goes into the whole like genre of biblical writing and things like that. I'm not going to focus on that at the moment. I'm going to focus on Lilith. So there was a character in Mesopotamian mythology, Canaanite mythology, kind of all over the Middle East. Basically, the Middle East in general was very Semitic, so the Jews are just one group among them. They shared a lot of stuff. This character is who became Lilith. So it was originally just a demonic figure, often associated with like a succubi. So associated with, nighttime shenanigans, with the death of children, with all sorts of things like that. She didn't become linked to Adam until the Middle Ages, when I think I have it listed here, maybe. But in the Middle Ages, she was eventually linked to Adam in the alphabet of Ben Sira. So that was the first time that somebody decided, Lilith is the first woman. So he hooked Adam and Eve, or he hooked Adam and Lilith together, made that whole story. And then in the 20th century, they have rebranded her again in a similar way that they have tried to rebrand several other characters from mythology, like Medusa and Hades, and turning them good. So for Lilith, she has turned into a feminist icon because she refused to submit. And that is the version of Lilith that most people nowadays know. But that is a very modern interpretation on the character. She's an interesting character. There's a lot of fun stuff to dig into on her, but definitely not biblical. It's like most of the other stuff in the show, she got brought in from extra biblical sources.
yeah, that's it's interesting too. I find it interesting in your description of Lilith how she started out as this demon. She's a demonic character, a succubi, associated with that. And then now, throughout evolution, she's being associated with feminine power, and how like our society to think that this character who started out as a demon is actually good and like worshipped as this ultimate sort of version of womanhood. And it's just so wrong. It's so demonic, that these things have been rebranded that way. And there's so many people who just don't understand where these stories even really came from, and what's going on.
Now, Lilith does appear once in the Bible, but there's a big debate on what the meaning is. So there's a verse in Isaiah when it's talking about out in the wilderness among the Liliths. And some people are like, so is this the demon Lilith? Is this the goddess Lilith, the mythical figure that, dead children and men and women problems? Or, because there's a lot of other animals and things in that description. And anybody that has bothered to dig into the King James, you notice they also say things like unicorns and basilisk and satyr. So there's two views on this, that it's talking about the demonic view of Lilith and it's just kind of a one-off thing, or it's talking about an animal that was given that name and they think it might be some type of owl.
Yeah, I've heard a lot about particularly like unicorns. When you look at when you like dig into like unicorns and what are they, it's most likely talking about a rhinoceros.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes it's rhino, sometimes it's aurochs. They just call it the horned one.
Yeah.
And then it gets translated as unicorn. It doesn't necessarily mean one horn. But you're basically going to find that in the King James version and any version that follows them, because we didn't have a good translation for a lot of those words at the time. Because you're looking at Hebrew words for animals that we were unsure of, and they threw in their best approximation, and a lot of them ended up being mythical creatures, which then you get people nowadays, especially on Facebook, laughing like, you guys believe unicorns existed? Well, no, not really.
Well, I think we've come in for a landing from the theological standpoint. So many things that we also could have brought in, but again, we'd be here for hours if we're trying to include every single aspect. But we want to thank Stephen for joining us. He'll actually be back with us next week to talk about more of the characters, the music, and the overall story of Hazbin Hotel. We want to give you all kind of a theological background and kind of more to think about before we get into the actual content and the storyline. But until next time, and we hope you'll join us next week, keep those halos shining and stay holy, my friends.